Welcome to yet another series of Tidbits. I'm Dr. Paul Petersen, and this time we're looking at the book of Daniel. Seventh-day Adventists all over the world will in the first quarter of 2020 be studying this particular book for their weekly Bible study. I will not necessarily follow the quarterlies. I will follow Daniel chapter by chapter. But let me say a little about my own background as an introduction. For many years I have spent a lot of time studying the book of Daniel, professionally and academically. My doctoral dissertation was made in the prayers of Daniel. I have taught at Avondale College, I have taught at Andrews University, and I have also on a more professional level been conducting seminars in the book of Daniel, not only in my home country of Denmark, but also in other places like the village church in Bjørn Springs, close to Andrews University. So my heart is very much in this book, as is my experience. My original intention when I began making tidbits was to limit myself to a few exciting items from each chapter. Maybe I will go a little further than that when looking at the book of Daniel. I intend to give an overview of each of the chapters from a literary perspective and then place it in the context of the book as a whole. With this introduction, let's jump straight into the first chapter of the book. It is, borrowing a title from Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities. Now, you may benefit from having read through the chapter before we look at it. The two cities are Babylon and Jerusalem. Reading from New International Version, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Now, this tale of two cities is not simply a historical, political recount of what happened. We quickly realize that the story is told in such a way that we move beyond or beneath the level of history. There is a spiritual aspect. Notice, it is said the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. So there is a religious element involved. That is also coming to the fore by the use of the name Sinai for Babylonia. Now, that is not part of the NIV translation. You will find it in most other translations. Sinai is a term particularly used in the account of the Tower of Babylon back in Genesis chapter 11. So from the outset, we are placing ourselves in more than a simple political fight. This is part of a spiritual battle. That is how it is told. The Lord is the one who gave the king of Judah to the hands or the power of Nebuchadnezzar. So history is not what it seems in this book. Coming to Babylon as a prisoner, Jews would meet Babylonians who would definitely claim that their god, Marduk, was far greater than Yahweh. After all, he had won the victory. So the Jews would have to say, no, actually, Yahweh is the one who is in control. We are only here because of the apostasy, the sin of our fathers. That's why God delivered. God gave our king into the hands of your king. So power does not necessarily make right. those who have the power and exercise it may not be in the right. Now, as we read on, the story turns to the more personal by illustrating this issue of seeming power by telling about Daniel and his friends. These are young men, most likely only in their teens, who are brought to Babylon in order to be educated at the king's academy. Let's call it that. And the way this story tells it, it reveals the tension. The fact is that from the perspective of the Babylonians, Daniel and his friends are becoming Babylonians. I don't know whether the term is found, whether you can verbalize it, but what is happening is that Nebuchadnezzar and his court try to Babylonize Daniel and his three friends. They gave them new names, and these are names for Babylonian gods. They also asked to eat of the king's table, which was a significant part of fellowship with whatever the king stood for. Now, the story tells it in such a way that we realize, oh, more is going on. The names are related as mock names. Daniel, whose name would be Belshazzar, is actually called Belteshazzar, which is a mockery of the name of the god and the king. It may mean, may God protect not the prince, but the mule. Imagine the Jews having a little fun with mispronouncing the name. One of the names of the three friends becomes Abednego. But also that is a misspelling. It should have been Abednego with a B, not a D like in Goliath. So the way the story is told indicates that the attempt to Babylonize Daniel and his friends did not succeed, while the king and his court may have thought so. The tension between the Babylonians and the Jews' religion is then exemplified in Daniel's choice not to take part in what comes from the king's table. There is a wordplay in Hebrew of significance because the phrase that is used, the verb that is used to indicate that they got new names is from the Hebrew verb sim, vayasem, and he placed names, new names on Daniel and his friends, and immediately after that in the next verse, in verse 8, it is said, Daniel resolved. That's a New International Version translation, but that is the same verb, vayasem, from sim. Daniel decided. So this is deliberately an action against the attempt to Babylonize them. Now then you have the story, Daniel and his friends are allowed to, after some trouble or some testing, they are allowed to refrain from eating from the king's table, and they have their own diet. King Nebuchadnezzar does not know. So in the end, when Daniel and his friends excel and are accepted to move further into the service at the royal court after 3 years of education, most likely only the best would succeed after these 3 years. When Daniel and his friends do so, the king probably did not know that Daniel and his friends had not yet been Babylonized, that they had followed their own educational system in these years. But they did excel. The readers know what seemed to be the powerful Babylonian Empire did not succeed as it seemed. God was still in charge. In the chapter, there is one specific verb used for the actions and interventions by God. The word Nathan in Hebrew, to give. In New International Version, it is, for literary reasons, translated in 3 different ways, so let's look at it. The first is in the opening verse, the Lord delivered Jehoiakim the king into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. The word here translated delivered is Nathan, to give. And then in verse 9, Daniel is said to have been caused, or God has caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. Here you have the same verb, Nathan. God gave Daniel favor, rachamim, mercy, in the personal relationship to his superior. And then in verse 17, the following line is there, to these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding. 3 times the activities of God is mentioned, all with the verb Nathan. God is the great giver of power to kings, wisdom to the wise, and personal favor and interpersonal relationship. One extra note, in verse 17, the following sentence said, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. The Hifil form of the verb bin, understand, in my view, as the ancient translations would also testify, Septuagint into Greek and Vulgate into Latin, in my view, this is a true causative Hifil. So the translation should rightly say, and Daniel was given understanding. His source is not inherent in himself, it is coming as a gift from God. Now, let me just add a few sentences about the role of chapter 1 in the book as a whole. Naturally, if you only read chapter 1, you haven't been able to see how it relates to the rest, and we will have more to say about that at a later stage. But just as an introduction, chapter 1 is in Hebrew. Basically, the following chapters are all written in Aramaic. So what you have is chapter 1 in Hebrew introducing 6 more chapters in Aramaic. When you come to chapter 7, however, this is still in Aramaic. However, it is also introducing the remainder of the book's visionary part. So you have an Aramaic chapter in chapter 7 introducing the rest of the book in Hebrew. So here you have one little glimpse of the structure of the book. Daniel 1 is in Hebrew, introducing chapters in Aramaic. Chapter 7 in Aramaic is then introducing chapters in Hebrew. There's more to that. In one sense, chapter 1 is an introduction to the book as a whole, and themes from chapter 1 will pop up later in the book. We will look at that when we arrive to these chapters. But you also see that indicated by the last verses of the chapter 1. When you come to verses 20 and 21, it is said, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. So he is now given a position in the royal court where he stays until Cyrus. So that brings you towards the end of the book. It covers it all. And these 2 verses are not a description of what happened after the 3 years of training and the examinations, the finals, after those 3 years. That you have in the previous verse, in verse 19, which closes with, "So they entered the king's service." So the more personal knowledge of Nebuchadnezzar, knowledge of Daniel and his friends, have not yet arrived, and that helps us solving a problem that otherwise would occupy us in chapter 2. So once again, welcome to these tidbits from Daniel. They may be a little more comprehensive than some of the other tidbits, but I hope you will enjoy, and I will invite you to come back when we move on to chapter 2. Thank you for listening.